it says.
So you can start talking to them. Say hello.
Okay, we're going to talk about watering and how to program your irrigation controller tonight. My name is Bill Kassenizer. I'm with the City of Scottsdale in water conservation. I am a water conservation specialist and run several programs here at the City of Scottsdale and do a certain amount of online trainings. This training is going to reference the brochure that you see on the screen called Watering by the Numbers. If you have this brochure, it might be beneficial for you to grab it. If you don't have it, you can look at what we have on the screen. It'll take us through page by page the guide that we offer to our citizens and water customers to use water and use it wisely according to some guidelines that have been developed probably some 20-25 years ago by water conservation specialists in the Valley. On the very back of the book is all the water conservation offices in the Valley and their phone numbers in case you wanted to contact your office to, with a specific question or a concern about the water in your area. The guide itself is a how-to for a homeowner so that they can figure out how to run your irrigation system. We also, in a live session, would use an irrigation controller and pass them out to everybody in the class and put a battery in them so that they become live and teach the step-by-steps how to program, how to change the settings in the irrigation controller to make a program run, to make your turf area run, or to make your plants run, your garden run, your pots run, however your system is designed and how to use it. So let me see if I can figure out how to open this book up. Can I open this book, or can yeah, I can only see a little bit of the book right now, but there are three parts to sensible landscape watering. You need to know how much water your plants need, and you need to know how much water your system applies. And then there's matching your system's output up with your plant's needs. Simply stated, the hardest thing there, I think, is knowing how much water your plants need, and the book is going to provide that information for you. Knowing how much water your system applies kind of refers to knowing either the rate of application of your sprinklers or how many drip emitters you have on a particular plant and what size they are. Ideally, we would do something precise in the way that we're doing that. And matching them up is the actual implementation of putting a program in place that runs that irrigation for a certain amount of time, for a certain schedule of either a certain number of days of the week, or once every 4th day, or once every 5th day, or once every 10th day, depending on what time of year it is and how it waters. Can we go ahead and roll down a little bit on the screen? So in the brochure, we're looking at how much water do your plants need, how deep to water, and the size of the watering pattern, how deep it needs to be and how wide. Basically, when we're watering plants, we're watering the root systems of plants. And this shows some of the techniques that have been used that are tried and true, of using a screwdriver to check the depth of the moisture in the soil, or a soil probe. We use soil probes quite regularly around here. When you're down in the alluvial plain and the ground becomes soft after you've watered, and you can check how deep that water went, how deep your application went by probing the ground. How deep will the probe go? Does the probe come out wet, or does it come out dry, or does it go in just a couple of inches and not any further? Those are the things that are telling you about the efficiency of your watering application. A long screwdriver, maybe 18 inches, will work in most cases all the way up to trees. A longer soil probe, we use a 3-foot long soil probe when we're trying to check the depth of moisture around mature trees. Mature trees need to be watered to a depth of 24 to 36 inches. How do we water them? Do we water right up against the trunk of our plants? No, we try to keep the water away from the trunks of our plants. And as we go along, you can go ahead and roll that up to page 4. So when we're looking at plant material, we kind of classify it off into these 3 different groups. We have our smaller plants. We have kind of like the ground covers or low growing plants. A lot of our native plants stay kind of small and tight. Then we move on to our shrubbier plant material, which the root system gets a little deeper. We use the width of the canopy to help us determine the width of the root system. We try to water whatever the width of the canopy is. So if I'm watering a tree and I made a box, when I show this to a customer, I generally draw a container around the root systems, just a little box to show them that obviously the tree box that's 3 foot deep, the shrub box that's 2 foot deep, and the small box would be around a small plant would only be 1 foot deep. All those boxes are going to require a different amount of water to effectively water the roots of that plant. One of the things that we see on a regular basis is a great big old tree that has the dripper that was put on it when it was planted, and never was there a drip emitter added to it. And by the grace of God, that tree continues to grow and flourish. But it's usually because there are other plants around that tree that are being watered. The bottom half of this illustration kind of shows the ideal location of where we might put water, especially the first time that we make an adjustment. When we first plant a plant, generally that water is right up against the base of the plant where the trunk is. But as we make adjustments to plants, we move water uphill and we spread water out. If you're watering a larger shrub like the middle picture up at the top, the shrub in the top, and you're doing it with one drip emitter, you're probably missing the boat at getting water to all the roots. So when the water hits the ground from a drip emitter, it spreads out and it makes kind of like a large onion shape. The droplet of water where it hits the ground, osmosis, the soil osmotically pulls the water in all directions, but it'll cover, maybe an 18-inch area down to whatever depth, according to how long and what size drip emitter it is. So if we were doing that on a medium-sized shrub, we might need to maybe abandon that and put a T on and add a secondary emitter. And then down at the bottom there where it shows 2 wet spots on both sides of the shrub, that would probably be a better bet for a shrub that's in the 3 to maybe 5 to 6 foot diameter range. And then of course, if we're watering a tree and it's a tree that we want to see grow, we want to see it do well, we need to spread water out around the canopy edge, preferably underneath the canopy edge of the tree, and get it, the further and further away that we move it, gradually move it to get it away from the trunk of the tree, encourages those roots to reach out and colonize new soil and find, water and nutrients that are going to make that tree healthy. But one of the most important things about making that tree healthy and having that tree have a long life is that it receives the anchorage that it needs. And that's what those roots do. Most of those roots are growing in large numbers when they find water to grow in. So if you never move the water away from the base of the tree, the canopy can continue to grow, but you don't have that balance between your root system, the size of your root system, and the size of the upper canopy of the tree. And so when it's out of balance, we generally can see a lot of trees that topple over. In a wind and in a monsoon storm, sometimes we get branch breakage, and if we get branch breakage, we can trim and prune that out. But if the tree blows over because it didn't have a good root system, we're generally going to lose that tree. So encouraging your roots to spread out and colonize more soil is pretty important. And we do it by adding, multiple emitters. In that image there, it shows 8 emitters around the base of that tree. Now, if that's a citrus tree, it's going to have a different watering schedule for how often it needs watered compared to if it's a desert tree. You can go ahead and roll that if you want. So in the brochure, it kind of goes back and forth, and it tries to make points about how much water does each part of your watering system apply. And the sample test that's on this page is in reference to watering a turf area, and we call it a can test. It's simply a test to measure how fast the irrigation system that you have is applying water, but it can do more than that. It can also teach you how even your application is, which is almost as important as how fast it applies water. So this test requires randomly scattering cans into under a turf area, trying to keep them away from the sprinkler heads, so that you can collect water over a 15-minute runtime. We use a ruler with tenths of inches on it, and we measure the depth of water that shows up in the cans. Now, ideally, those numbers would be all relative to each other. There's a sample test down in the bottom right-hand corner that we're looking at on this, and it depicts a can with a 0.3 in it, a can with a 0.2 in it, a 0.3, a 0.25, a 0.4, a 0.3. Those are relatively good numbers. Now, if your can test, you have a couple of cans that have 0.1 in them, a couple cans that have 0.7 of them, and that's a good indication that you need to do a tune-up on your irrigation system to get the water to be distributed more evenly. In the irrigation auditing world, they call it your distribution uniformity. Distribution uniformity is best attained by having all the same type of equipment. So if I have a sprinkler system that's been there for a long time, and it's been pretty much bastardized by having a Rainbird head next to a Toro head next to Home Depot, an Orbit, a Champion, all these different types of products. Well, all those products by different manufacturers rain water down at different rates and different speeds. And so they're not going to work very well together. But if you have a system that is all one brand, and I'm not particular about what brand it is, there's different, the top 3 are probably the Toro, the Rainbird, and the Hunter equipment. But you can have Watermaster from Home Depot, or something from Lowe's, or something from Ace Hardware. As long as all your equipment matches each other, you can get that uniform distribution of water over the surface area. That's really what you're trying to do. So when they add up those depths, it comes to 1.75 divided by the 6 cans. It comes up to an average of 0.29. 0.29 is like a third of an inch in 15 minutes. And without even going to the next page, if I told you that 3/4 of an inch is the kind of application that you would need, you would immediately know that you need more than 15 minutes. You probably need more than 30 minutes, since 15 minutes equals 0.29, and 2 times 15 minutes would be 30 minutes. That would get you to a 0.58. And that's not 0.75 where I'm trying to get you to. So it's going to be more than 30 minutes. But if we roll the screen to the next page, you'll see that we've created a chart. Wait a second, we got to go one more page and then we'll come back to this page. So here's a chart that uses, and it shows to make 3/4 of an inch with a 0.29. You can see the 0.30 there, and it shows you that it would be about 37 or 38 minutes to equal the right amount of water with a sprinkler system that applies water at that rate. Now, if you look up at the 0.8, obviously a sprinkler system that's putting water down much faster would have a much shorter runtime, and your application, the rate of your application has a lot to do with that equipment, what type of equipment it is, and what kind of spacing the sprinklers are set at. Sprinkler heads that are real close together, like if you have a really small grass area and it has lots of sprinkler heads wrapped around it and they're 6 feet apart or 4 feet apart, the rate of application is going to be really, really high. So you have to measure it before you can make the determination of how long that system should be on for. So what if you had a rate that was much higher than what this chart is? Well, that's easy enough. If you've got an inch in 15 minutes, you can do some math and you can figure that out. How to appropriate water a really fast system. If 0.8 is 14, 0.7 is 16. There's a pattern here that you can follow, and it would tell you that 12 minutes would be the maximum amount of time that you could run for 0.9. 10 minutes would be the maximum amount that you could run for if you had a 1-inch application. But a lot of the new technologies are much slower applications, and those are better applications. There are heads out there now that are high efficiency heads that apply water at a much slower rate. Most of the equipment that we've been using for years and years and years in turf applications apply water much faster than the soil can absorb the water. And so we get ponding, we get runoff. If you have slope, water moves to the bottom of the hill, and you got to get more creative about how you apply the water to try to keep it more even over the surface. And there are some techniques that we'll talk about, things like cycling and soaking, and doing some different edge controls to keep that water where you want to keep it. Because if you get water into the city streets because it runs off of your lawn, that's a violation of our city ordinance, our water waste ordinance, and you can actually be fined for water waste. We're awfully friendly and we try to help you with it before we fine you, but in the situations where someone doesn't care and doesn't want to keep that water in the grass area, well, there's nothing left to do but take care of that problem. So in this situation, that 0.3 would indicate that you would need to run for about 38 minutes. If you roll the screen down a little bit, we have a month-to-month scale that shows how often it would need to be applied. Now, believe it or not, we're in November, and if you haven't overseeded your lawn, your Bermuda grass only needs watered about once every 6 to 14 days. The schedule between October and November moves very, very quickly through the cycle. When we're in really cold weather, it's once every 14 days. When we're having 80 to 90 degree days, it's probably still around once every 6 to 7 days. Now, if you've overseeded, you drop down onto this other line, this lower line, this ryegrass line. And on the ryegrass line, when you plant ryegrass, and a lot of people have planted ryegrass, and they go through this germination phase where they run the irrigation system for, a certain number of minutes, multiple times a day, every day, because you can't let your seed dry out while it's in germination phase. which means that waiting until the nighttime temperatures are down around 70 degrees, 68 degrees, means that you'll need a lot less water to germinate that seed, as opposed to when it's 90, 100 degrees. Back in September and August, there are people who try to overseed way too soon, and the Bermuda grass isn't ready to go dormant, and the temperature's too high, and to keep that seed moist and get a good germination rate, you pretty much have to go kind of crazy on it, and it can drive your water bill crazy and drive our water production crazy. So we want to try to do it at the right time of the year, and the right time of the year is out into October, like it is like this year. When we got into October, the temperature finally did come down, and all of a sudden it went from being hot to being fairly cool. We had a really nice cool spell, but then it's warmed up a little bit since then. So we're playing around in a range. We're always playing around in a range, and when you're getting that seed germinated and you feel confident that you want to start reducing the water so that you can mow it without the lawnmower sinking in it, that's when you go back out to once every 3 days. A lot of people will take a couple of start times away after about a week and still be watering a couple of times a day, and then they go every other day. But when you can get out to once every 3 days, that's when you want to be applying the appropriate amount of water again, which is what you got from your can test. And then all of a sudden, as temperature goes down and we move into November and December, you're going to move once every 5 days, once every 7 days, all the way out to once every 10 days if we get a cold spell. Because when it's cold, our turf doesn't need the water to cool itself. It's plenty cool. It will get too wet and it'll start to show issues. It won't be green. It'll start to get a little yellow. And if you start overwatering that turf, it's only going to affect your water bill. So you move real quickly from 3 to 10. And of course, when you have a nice established ryegrass, and if you make a fertilizer application, you water. But other than that, you won't be watering very often, maybe once every 10 to once every 14 days, all the way through November, December, January, and February. And then all of a sudden, we're turning around and we've going from hot to cold, but then all of a sudden we start getting warmer as we go into March and April and May. And that's when we start reducing the number of days between irrigation cycles. So October is somewhere about once every 3 days, once we get the grass established and we're mowing it, because we want it dry when we mow it. We don't want to mow it on an irrigation day. And then, as temperature goes down between October and November, that's when we transition from 3 to 10. And then we're somewhere between 10 and 14 for the next 4 months, depending on what the temperature is like and what the weather is like. So let's go backwards and let's go back to the page in front of here. And so we're going back to some drip irrigation, estimating flow on drip irrigation. We have a lot of different types of equipment, application equipment, when we're running drip irrigation. And when we're running drip irrigation, the most ideal setting that we would have, we would have separate irrigation systems to water plant material that's different from each other. Like we would have a tree system, we would have a plant system. A more advanced system might have a system that waters the ground cover, and a system that waters the plants, the shrubs, a system that waters the trees. And if we had say we had citrus trees and we had desert trees, we might need 2 systems to water those trees effectively. That would be the ideal irrigation system setup, so that we can be efficient by watering those types of plant material the way those types of plant material need to be watered. But what generally happens is people save money by putting one irrigation system in and then trying to water everything on that one irrigation system. And it becomes a little bit more difficult to make sure that every plant is getting the right amount of water. So you have to, run your system for some certain amount of time and put the appropriate size drip irrigation on the plant. Different size drips have different performances. Like this image on the right shows the half-gallon-an-hour dripper that goes drip, 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 which is different than the 1 gallon an hour dripper that goes drip, 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 almost as fast as you can see them coming off at the end of that. And yes, I do that every day. So drip, 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 drip is a 1 gallon an hour dripper. It's almost constantly dripping. Well, if you're looking at it, if you're holding that dripper in your hand and it's on, you can evaluate that dripper by looking at that flow. And that's what this guide is for. But if I had that irrigation system, we call it the one system wonder, that has all those different types of plant material. You've got the trees on it. You've got a citrus tree on it, a desert tree. You've got some, some aloes and some agaves, and you have some cactus, and you have a couple of pots by the front door that are trying to be watered on the same system. And you're going to have to get pretty creative at picking the right sources. Putting 4 gallons an hour on your citrus trees, maybe 2 gallons an hour on your desert trees, maybe a 2 gallon an hour on some larger shrubs, 1 gallon an hour on your native plants and your ground covers, and half gallon an hour on all of your cactus and succulents and aloes and agaves, those plants that don't really like water, but we want to water them because they're in our yard and we want them to look like the best golden barrel in the world. So we water them. We got to be careful not to give them too much water. So choosing the right dripper for each one of those plants. There's also a quality of dripper that is better than others. We want you to use a dripper that puts out a prescribed amount and make good decisions about what drippers you put on different plants in that situation. So pressure compensating drip emitters are made by pretty much all of the companies. It's kind of like the upper level of the drip emitters. And they have some distinct advantages. Pressure compensating drip emitters have a rubber diaphragm that's kind of sandwiched in the manufacturing that the water has to defeat. It has to work its way through this this rubber that's pushed into the channel that it's trying to follow to get to the opening, which causes the system to equalize in pressure. And then as it fights its way past the rubber and gets to the orifice where it comes out, it becomes a very controlled piece of equipment at being precise about the volume that it's letting out. So all the 2 gallon hour drippers have the same half-inch long stream of water and drip like a 1 gallon hour dripper after a half-inch long stream. Anytime you have a red pressure compensating dripper by a particular brand that is the 2 gallon an hour dripper, it's green in other brands. So what brand you use is pretty critical too. Sticking with one brand is pretty important so that you don't get all confused on what's going on out there. But using the visual techniques, you can tell that if you have a stream of water that is an inch long, that's 4 gallons an hour, and the half inch is 2 gallons an hour, and constantly dripping is 1 gallon an hour, and drip, drip, drip is what we put on the cactus and succulents and aloes and agaves, because that's only a half a gallon an hour. Now, what we try to do with those drip irrigation systems is we try to come up with a runtime where we can create a small volume of water and a large volume of water in the same amount of time. Since we have one valve that comes on, the water travels through the pipe and all the plants are going to get watered. So my favorite is a 2-hour runtime. A lot of people, there's really no regulation, nobody who says do this or do that. People will tell you how much to water at certain times of the year, but they won't give you the information to water all year round. I'm telling you that you could water your irrigation system for 2 hours if you put the right drip emitters on it so that every plant gets the amount of water that it really needs, and the book tells you how much water they need. We're going to get there. you could adjust how often it happens by setting a different number on your schedule. And it makes the watering of the meeting the needs of the plant for different times of the year very easy, because you move the irrigation cycle down to about once every 5 days for 2 hours in the middle of the hottest part of the year. And then you can stretch it out to about once every 14 days, not unlike what we're doing with the turf irrigation. But it's a slightly different cycle than the turf irrigation. So it would have to be on a different program in your clock so that it could run on a different schedule. So that's what the programs in your clock are about, is the opportunity to water on different schedules. So when I'm working with a customer, I have them write cactus and succulents by the ½ gallon an hour. I have them write ground covers and small plants by the 1 gallon an hour. And then I have them write shrubs and trees by the 2 gallons an hour. And for the 4 gallons an hour, I have them put great big stuff, because we rarely use 4 gallons an hour, or we don't want to use a lot of 4 gallons an hour. We would rather see everybody using the ½ gallon, 1 gallon, and 2 gallons, and putting combinations as your plants get bigger. So you might have 2 1 gallons, or 2 2 gallons, or 3 2 gallons, or in the case of that tree in the beginning of the book with the 8 drippers around it, 8 2 gallons around that tree would be 16 gallons an hour. And if we ran for 2 hours, we could produce 32 gallons for that tree. And at the same time, on a cactus or a succulent with a ½ gallon an hour dripper, we could produce 1 gallon in 2 hours. So you couldn't do a better job if you walked out there with a pitcher once a week and watered that cactus with 1 gallon of water. You couldn't do a better job than with a ½ gallon an hour dripper on a schedule that watered it once every 7 days. So that's kind of the gist of how the book works, and how drip irrigation works, and how the sprinkler irrigation works. And every now and then we run into somebody that has bubblers. And bubblers are a slightly different animal, but they make pressure compensating bubblers. I was at a woman's house today who had some bubblers that have the ability to just grab them and give them a spin, and more water comes out, or turn them the other way and less water comes out. And then she had some right next to it that had little screws that you use the screwdriver to turn them up or to turn them down, which is a little bit of a better program, excuse me. And then she also had some that, while her bubblers were running, that had drip components that were screwed on, that were trying to do drip irrigation at the same time as doing bubblers, which is a mistake from a distribution point of view. Drip irrigation is something that runs for hours, and bubblers are generally something that runs for minutes. So that's like having a sprinkler system with all kinds of different sprinkler heads doing all kinds of different things on it. It's a no-no. We don't do that. When we have a bubbler system, it's an all bubbler system. It's not part bubblers and part drip. When we have a drip irrigation system, it's all drip, and hopefully it's all drip with pressure compensating drippers on it. When we have a sprinkler system, it's all one brand of sprinkler equipment for uniformity. So those are the kind of things that you're going to run into. So if you were using bubblers that were pressure compensating bubblers, they're a lot like these drippers, where they come in a quart per minute, not a ½ gallon an hour, a ½ gallon a minute, not 1 gallon an hour, 1 gallon an hour, not 1 gallon a minute, not 2 gallons an hour, and 2 gallons a minute. So they're not in the book, but if you're using bubblers, I highly recommend that you use the pressure compensating bubblers. And the way you would do them would be the same way as you use the drippers. You pick your lowest watering plants and you put the quart per minute on, or plants that are close to your foundation, you don't want to water too much, you put the quart per minute on. And then every 4 minutes would be 1 gallon. And so if you fix one plant up in your yard to get the right amount of water in a certain number of minutes, not hours like drip irrigation, minutes, then you know the number of minutes that system is going to water for, and you can make good decisions about what bubblers need to be on bigger plants to get them the appropriate volume of water, using the watering guide here to tell you how much water different plants need. So now we've talked about sprinklers, and we've talked about drip, and we've talked about bubblers. Now, every now and then we run into different types of irrigation that are hooked together, and it's not uncommon to see drip irrigation and then somebody to have some kind of micro jet sprayers or some kind of tubing that has a whole bunch of drip emitters in it. And those are good for flower beds and for watering pots and things like that. But we should have a separate system to operate those to make it most efficient, and not be doing hooking them to our drip irrigation system or to our bubbler irrigation system. So those are the things that I would make points about. So you can go ahead and roll this a little bit. We got to get past the schedule for watering. And here, I want to talk about this for a split second. So when I tell you that your water needs 3/4 of an inch of water, that's for a high quality lawn. And what we're doing is when we do that can test, we develop what our sprinkler output number is in 15 minutes. And that test that we did was that 0.29. So they've made the cross hash there on the yellow highlighted area on the 0.3. And then for an average quality lawn, if you don't want to spend all the water on a high quality lawn, average quality lawn only takes 0.6 of an inch. So the difference in the amount of water that a high quality turf area would require is 38 minutes down to about 30 minutes for average quality turf. So you can always water less than that, in certain situations where you have a shaded area. You can always reduce the amount of water according to, visually, what does it look like? Does it look like it needs water? But typically, average quality turf is 0.6 and high quality turf is 0.75. And that's where those minutes would fall on that cross hash there if you moved from 0.6 down to 0.75. Go ahead, you can roll it. So we're approaching page 9 and 10 in the brochure. Oh no, go back. There we go. So here's a chart that tells us how much water. Now, this chart was developed thinking about the amount of soil in cubic feet that would be underneath a plant of a certain size. So I like to talk about rose bushes because everybody has a rose bush or everybody has seen a rose bush. And it's easy to see in your head. A rose bush is typically about a 3-foot tall by about a 3-foot wide shrub. So if you cross the 3-foot with the shrub material there, it talks about 8 gallons of water that would be needed for that plant. And so, we're talking about there's a certain volume of soil underneath a plant of that size. And if it's 3 foot by 3 foot and it's a circle, it's a mathematical equation that talks about your pi r squared. So 1.5 by 1.5 by 3.14 times 2 foot deep, because our shrubs are 2 foot deep. We developed that there's about 16 cubic feet of soil that need to be watered, that need about a 1/2 gallon of water per cubic foot, because that's all the soil can hold is a 1/2 gallon of water. And so we've developed that it needs 8 gallons of water when it gets watered. That would be getting that soil to its optimum amount of water that it can hold. That's the most water it can hold. Any more water than that, we would probably have runoff, or we would be watering deeper than the root system of that plant. And so that would be wasteful. So we've determined that plants of different sizes need different volumes of water. And you use this information when you're putting drip emitters on your drip system to water different plants. So if I've incorporated in a 2-hour run cycle, and I'm watering this rose bush, I would put two 2-gallon-an-hour drippers on both sides of that rose bush, about a foot away, maybe 18 inches, depending on how mature that rose bush is. And those two 2-gallon-an-hours equal 4 gallons in 1 hour. And if I ran that system for 2 hours, that would be 8 gallons. Now I fix that plant up so that that plant is getting the appropriate volume of water when I run my irrigation system. So if I move to a plant of a different size, like a 4-foot shrub, a larger shrub, and I put 3 2s on it, that would be 6 gallons in 1 hour, 12 gallons in 2 hours. So we're just trying to get close to these numbers when we water our plants so that we can feel comfortable that our plants are going to be okay with the run cycle. If we have a full-grown citrus tree and we're trying to get good fruit off of it, it's a 150-gallon plant because it's a 16-foot diameter canopy tree. Now, if it's only a 10-foot citrus tree, it needs 60 gallons or 59 gallons. But trying to get the right number of gallons around a plant. Well, you say to yourself, well, how am I going to get 60 gallons on that tree? Well, if I use those 4-gallon-hour drippers, and I put, say I put 6 4s, well, there's 24 gallons. If I put 8 4s, there's 32 gallons. If I'm getting 32 gallons an hour and I run it for 2 hours, where do I get to? 64 gallons. So it's very possible to create large volumes of water in small volumes of water around our plants. If we do it correctly, and we have that system that just has all of our plants on one system, we can meet those needs of those plants with those different drip combinations. If we back out of this image a little bit, we see that there's in the green tab along the side of the page, there's a little cheat sheet that helps us determine how many drippers and what sizes they kind of need to be to get into the ballpark. If we use smaller drippers, we're going to end up needing to run longer. If we do it appropriately, you know, like the 7 to 10 foot diameter canopy tree is asking for 3 to 5 emitters, and they should be 2 to 4 gallons an hour. We're gonna get close to the numbers of the watering needs for these different size plants if we follow this kind of a format. And then it's just a matter of how long do you need to run the irrigation for to make the plants happy. And then it's a matter of making life easy by only changing after that the cycle of how often it happens. And with different clocks, it's called different things. We call it skip days on some clocks. We call it interval watering on some clocks, depending on what you have. Now, some people might have a smart irrigation controller, and with a smart irrigation controller, you have 2 options. You can create a schedule and you can put a schedule in, or you can use that controller if it has the capability to create its own watering cycle. And when we use an irrigation controller to create a watering cycle, they have the ability to do that. If we give them enough information about what they're watering, they can do that themselves. And in Scottsdale, we have a smart controller rebate that you can replace your irrigation controller that you have to change manually all the time with a WaterSense labeled smart controller. And it can build its own schedule and adjust itself automatically throughout the year, but you still have to check it. You have to check it for leaks and you have to check your flow. One of the programs that I do here in the city of Scottsdale is the outdoor water efficiency checks, where we physically go to customers' houses and go through their irrigation system with them. It's like getting what you're getting right now online in person. And just kind of give you all the suggestions and tips to how to properly water your plant material in person. And we make these same suggestions, we follow these same guidelines, and we teach everybody how to water this stuff, however this is. I'm going to take a little break right here and see if anybody has any questions, see if there's anything that we, that from what we've covered so far, everybody seems to be pretty good.
I want to tell them how to make a work appointment.
Yeah. So if you're interested in having the outdoor water efficiency check, all you have to do is on the back of this brochure, there's the phone number for the Water Conservation Office, and you can call the water department and contact us and say that you're interested in getting the outdoor water efficiency check. The number for the City of Scottsdale Water Conservation Office is right there, 480-312-5650. You can get all of our information about watering and water conservation online at scottsdaleaz.gov. If you look in our water conservation area, we have all of our information about controllers, about rebates, about programs that we conduct to help you save water. If you back out of this at all, if you're not a City of Scottsdale employee, all the water conservation offices that use this same brochure to teach people how to water, and we all do, we print this brochure together, we all use the same brochure. We call ourselves AMWA, the Arizona say that real fast. AMWA is the Arizona Municipal Water Users Association. That's all these cities that are listed on the back of the brochure. And we all use the same brochure to teach everybody how to water. This is the brochure that is used. You know, like I said, you can go to the garden store and they'll tell you how to water things when you plant them. And they'll tell you how to water things at a certain time of the year. But this brochure is a guidelines for how to water throughout the whole year, not just how to water one thing, how to water your grass, how to water your plants, how to water your shrubs, how to water your fruit trees, how to water your cactus, how to water, you know, anything that you have, your annuals, your pots, your garden. You know, you want to learn how to water it. This is the Bible. This is how you learn. You use this brochure. If we go back into the brochure a little bit, see if we can pick up back where we were. As we move along, go the other way to the next page. Here we are at a runtime worksheet. Now this is what you're kind of tasked with when you've got that one system wonder and you're trying to get different plants a certain amount of water. And so what this does is it identifies the size of the plant. It identifies what's currently going on in the way of drippers on the plant. And it kind of gives you an idea where you record the water requirement and you make a decision out on the last line about the runtime. How long do you intend to run? And it's a simple math problem to figure out what the combination of drip emitters and the size of the drip emitters are that can get you to your volume that you're trying to attain, the gallons per minute that the plant needs. So the runtime worksheet, another way of doing that might be to get yourself a bundle of landscape flags, maybe use 10 of them, number them 1 through 10, and take them out to a plant in the yard and plug them in next to a plant. And then get yourself a notebook and back off from that plant and make a determination, well, what size is that plant? How much water does that plant need? If I'm going to use a 2-hour runtime, what emitters would I need to buy to hook up onto that plant to get that plant the right amount of water? And you can do that on plant number 1 and develop a shopping list of how many drippers and what sizes you need to do those 10 plants. And you know, move through your yard and do a little bit at a time. Don't overwhelm yourself with bringing it up to snuff, but you'll be so happy that you did it and didn't have somebody else do it who didn't care as much as you do about what you're doing. So if you set every plant up to get the right amount of water in that 2 hours of runtime, then it's a simple matter of adjusting the schedule as you go through the year. Can you roll that down?
Here's a question. Shouldn't we try to discourage natural grass or turf as they seem to require much more water?
Yeah, you know, Turf has a purpose in our landscape. Watering grass cools the environment and is pleasant, as long as there's a purpose for it. As long as you use that grass for something. I say all the time, if the only person who uses a grass area is a person pushing a lawnmower, chances are we probably don't need that grass. So I would discourage, narrow strips of grass and areas that are hard to water, areas that are sloped, that are wasteful. But having grass in a xeriscape is a principle that is part of a xeriscape. But having the amount of grass that you actually need and not, wall-to-wall grass is probably more appropriate. Grass is a high water use plant. It has a need for a column of water about almost 5 feet tall annually over the surface area. Where if we used more natural or desert adapted or Arizona friendly plants, they need a column of water that's probably 1.5 foot tall annually over the surface area. And that's, things like lantanas and things that bloom and that have color and that are attractive. And creating a pleasant landscape might mean having a little piece of a grass area, something that's beneficial to you, that cools the environment where you live. If we take all of our grass areas out and we just put in rock, we're going to create a hotter, more unpleasant environment, and we might need to water plants around them even more, and maybe even run our air conditioning even more because we're creating a hotter environment around our own living space. Where turf sometimes is the answer to cool that environment. At the same time as I say that, I tell you that we have turf removal rebate programs, and as a water conservation office, for the last 35 years, we've represented using low water use plants in place of turf. So we want you to do what you want to do, but we want to have an environment that's pleasant, attractive, and like an environment that somebody would want to be in, as opposed to an environment that nobody wants to go out to. So if it's all rock, it might be scary and ugly too. Got another question?
Yes. Sorry. My computer is going a little slow. My questions are opening.
Okay, we can't see the other question right now, so we'll get to it when we can.
I don't see any other questions.
Can we roll the screen down? So here's schedules. The landscape watering schedule, as you can see, we talk about trees, shrubs, ground covers, and vines. We talk about cactus, annuals, warm season grass, and cool season grass, and the schedules that are associated with the different times of the year. If we just look at the trees, we see desert adapted trees and high water use trees. I'm going to give you some examples of high water use trees. Most fruit trees are going to be high water use. Peaches, pears, about the only fruit I can think of that's not high water use is pomegranate. So pomegranate's on the low water use plant list. So if you had a system where you were very concerned about the quality of your fruit and you were growing fruit, it's a very distinctive schedule. You're going to be between, once every 7 to 12 days for most of the year, except for the very coldest period of time. So that's a very narrow movement of watering cycle. You would in May and October, let's talk about the hottest time of the year. In May and October, where it says on the white line once every 7 to 10 days, well, in May you might be at 10 days. As it warms up in May, you might go down to 9, and as soon as it turns to June, you might go down to 8 or 7. And in the dog days of summer, when it's super hot, it's going to be once every 7 days that you want to create the volume of water that plant needs if you intend to have a quality harvest of the fruit. And I won't lie to you, I have lemon tree, peach tree, and lime tree in my yard. It's a good thing I know how to water them all, right? So being efficient is very important when you have those. And I have a separate irrigation system that waters those, as opposed to my front yard irrigation system that has my desert adapted trees on it. I have 2 mesquite trees in the front yard, and I have a different desert adapted tree run that runs in my backyard that has a couple of desert willows and a couple of eucalyptus trees on it. And so obviously it sounds like I have a lot of trees in a lot of space. But efficiency becomes very important, and our desert adapted trees get watered less often. But if you notice, in the middle of the dog days of summer, even the desert adapted trees get down to once every 7 days. And that's especially if they're not established and you're growing them. But a very established desert adapted tree will need watered a lot less often than once every 7 days. But I'll guarantee you that those fruit trees are going to need watered once every 7 days if you want that fruit to be good. So you see the breakdown there. It talks about desert adapted and high water use trees, and then desert adapted and high water use shrub material. So citrus trees are high water use. There are other things. If you plant ficus trees in your yard, those are a high water use tree. There are other high water use trees that are in use. Anything that's tropical, the jacaranda tree is not on the low water use plant list. So there are a lot of trees that are high water use trees. The whole list of whether it's high water use or low water use can be found at ADWR, the Arizona Department of Water Resources, has the list of all the plants that are low water use plants. And we have on our website, you can look at our materials. We have the low water use plant list, and we have plants for the Arizona desert. So we have books that identify what plants are low water use. But when we move down to shrubs, there are shrubs that are high water use, things like pittosporum and hibiscus, and there's a certain class of plant material that has come from some other region that's not a desert plant. Now, there's a lot of other desert adapted plants that have come from other regions of the world that are low water use plants. We have a wealth of plants and shrubs and stuff from Australia, and we have trees that are from Afghanistan. There are other desert regions that are very similar to ours, and the plant material that they grow there are plant material that we should be able to grow here. And water them on a desert adapted plant cycle once they're established. I think there would be a lot of ground to be gained by having a ground cover system only. If we really wanted to have pretty lantanas and other blooming, flowering plants in our front yard, those plants should really have a separate irrigation cycle from our trees and our shrubs. We could probably combine our trees and shrubs together on one system if we had a ground cover system. It's a shame to water our trees and shrubs like a ground cover system. And obviously cactus and succulents could be watered by hand in our yard. But like I said, a lot of times we put them on our irrigation system because we want them to be the best looking cactus or golden beryl in the world. And in fact, they survive on very little additional water other than rainfall. Now, in times where we aren't getting adequate rainfall, which has been, 22 of the last 30 years, they may need some supplemental watering. So that's why a lot of people are watering them on their irrigation systems. And now annuals, what are annuals? Well, annuals can be if you're doing a garden bed. Gardening, tomatoes, look at the cycle in the summertime. It's every 2 days. In the middle of the summertime, in the hottest part of the summer, if you don't water annuals at least once every 2 days, they're going to croak. You're not going to have anything there. In May and in October, it's as far apart as once every 5 days. So you're playing around in a range. And if you're using your irrigation controller right, you're not using the days of the week, you're using a numbering system. And an irrigation controller set on every 2 days would be sufficient to water, things that grow and produce in the garden in our summer times, things like zucchini, things like eggplant. I nurse my peppers along a lot of the time through the middle of the summer just by watering them every 2 days. And then as soon as the weather breaks, they start to look great again and get flowers on them and start producing fruit. I've got all kinds of different peppers in my garden right now. And, with the change in the weather, my annuals are producing really, really well. Warm season grass. Here we are, we're out in the fall. If we're watering warm season grass, depending on where we are in the temperature cycle, we could be once every 6 to 21 days. If we're watering the ryegrass, obviously we're 3 to 10. We talked about that a little bit already, about how there's a quick transition from going warm to going cold, and how many times a month. Well, if we're watering once every 3 days, that's 10 times a month. Well, if we're only watering once every 10 days, that's only 3 times a month. That's the difference between whether it's warm in October or whether it's cold. That's how much the cycle can change on us. And so being in control of your controller is going to save you a lot in the way of money and water. If we roll this a little bit, we can look at some other stuff in the book. This is slide back up to that. There we go. Look here. Here we are. As we move through the year, our plant water demand increases as it gets hotter. And we move our irrigation cycles closer together, whether they're plant cycles, whether they're garden cycles, whether they're tree cycles, to meet the needs of the summer heat. Typically, June is our hottest month. July, we generally can turn our irrigation down a little bit, because usually in July, what do we get? The advent of some free moisture into the system. The monsoon season starts. And when the monsoon season starts, if we continue to water things like it's hot and dry, we end up, creating some issues where we're overwatering things, because all of a sudden the plant, any plant, can't use water in the same way as it did when it was hot and dry. Because now we've got humidity, now we've got moisture from rain events. So it's time to start reducing those numbers. And that's when we start stretching out the number of days between the irrigation episodes, and it starts to get further and further away as we move towards December. And then obviously in January, we're at our lowest, and we start creeping back up as temperature starts to increase again. So that's the movement that we want to see people do on their irrigation controller, stretching out the irrigation episode as it cools down, and then moving it a little bit closer together gradually. If you could do it once a month, you could create this nice gradual increase and decrease in water that matches our plant's annual water requirement and demand. That would be really important to do. So we can go ahead and slide down a little bit here and look at, I believe we're about page 13. And we're talking about soil. Depending on where you live, you may have a clay loam soil. Most of us in Scottsdale have a clay loam soil, where we're kind of in between the picture that's on the right, where the water spreads out equally as wide as it goes deep. That's a loam, and the clay loam generally supplies water twice as wide as it goes deep. So we're someplace in the middle of those two soils. We say that we have a clay loam. But if you live up in the McDowell Mountains, or anywhere in extreme north Scottsdale, you have a more sandy soil. You might be between the loam and the sandy soil, because the granular nature of granite, the water passes through it much faster than when that granite broke down into its constituents and are piled all on top of each other, because that's what makes a clay soil. So clay soils are really good soils for holding moisture and holding nutrients. Sandy soils don't hold nutrients as well. And we might break our irrigation episodes up into multiple increments, not to try to apply the whole 2 hours on a drip irrigation system if we had sandier soils, or as I'm saying, I'm calling them sandy, but they're actually gravelier, so that we don't water past the root systems of our plants. We might run 2 cycles of 1 hour to get our 2 hours of irrigation on. Yeah, just slide down a little bit, and so here's a little interesting thing. A lot of times when I go to someone's house and I try to help them with their irrigation application, they're watering their plants every day. We water a brand new landscape every day to every 2 days in the summertime. We water in the spring and the fall a brand new landscape about once every 3 or 4 days. But when we did that, if it was drip irrigation and it had the right drip emitters for the plants, we'd probably only run it for about a half an hour because they're new plants and they don't have that established root system. And we'd probably do that for about 2 weeks. In weeks 3 and 4, in the summertime, we try to move it out to once every 3 to 4 days of irrigation. And we would probably increase it out to about an hour. In the fall and the spring, we might move out to about once every 6 to 7 days. Now, somewhere in between weeks 3 and weeks 4 and week 5, you're going to catch up to the normal watering cycle that's in the brochure. So you're going to continue to try to stretch the irrigation out and have it happen less often and be more irrigation. So we would go from 30 minutes to 60 minutes to 90 minutes out to our 2-hour runtime. We would gradually extend the time between irrigation until the plants are established. How long does it take to get plants established? Well, depending on when you plant them, you have a better chance of getting plants established if you plant them in the winter. They generally can make it through in the fall. The fall plantings get to go through a winter before they have to go through a summer. When you first come here, it's always better if you get to go through a winter before you have to go through a summer. So that's probably a good thing, but establishment of things can take 2 or 3 years. So you have to stay pretty much on the low side of the range of everything throughout the whole time while you're doing establishment. And so new plants take a while and have to be babied and have to be, in the nursery, they get watered every day. When we stick them into the ground, we kind of have to keep up with that for a little while until we can break them off of it. It's kind of a weaning. You have to wean these plants off of water and teach them to go a longer amount of time and give them enough water that it meets their needs as you wean them back and back so that they're being irrigated less and less often, but with more and more water to get them out to that 2-hour run cycle. Depending on the time of the year, you can get out to about once every 7 days. You might only get to once every 4 days. If it's hot and it's summertime and they're young, you might have to water everything every 4 days, even though the brochure says every 5 days. What we're offering in the brochure is guidelines to help you do a better job of properly irrigating your plants. It's entirely up to you how you want to do it. If you think that the plants need to look better, you can always water them a little bit more. The guidelines would, guide you into watering for a couple of hours once every so many days, and moving the number of days between irrigations as we go. I think that's pretty much it. Let's roll down to the next page. I don't think there's anything else. Page 14. There's my backyard. No, that's not my yard. I wish it was. But here's a look of some programming. In this example, when you have 3 programs available to you, and most of our irrigation controllers have that, putting the grass all on one program is very beneficial. In this situation, they show the desert shrubs and the citrus trees on bubblers on a program, watering on the same cycle, which was an every 14-day kind of a cycle. And then the desert adapted trees you see down at the bottom that are run for a longer amount of time, but run a lot less often. Those sound like some pretty established trees. The grass, they look like they're watering them every 2 days a week, which is about roughly every 3 to 4 days. In the summertime, the grass gets down to once every 3 days if you're applying the appropriate volume of water. That's a normal turf that's well established and is shading the ground underneath it because it's a good established, nice, thick, dense turf. Whatever amount of time your can test said to water it for, you would probably do it a couple of times a week, or if you were using the skip days or the interval, once every 3 days. That doesn't say that you have to do that. And if your grass isn't a nice thick stand and it's not going to withstand every 3 days, water every 2 days. If you have to water every day to get it established, do that until you get it established. Then try to get out to the normal cycle. That's about it for this watering guide. It's online, it's available free. Working with your irrigation system and working with the person who operates your irrigation system, or taking control of your own irrigation system, is really what I would like to see people do. If you are the one who pays for the water, why would you want to be the one who controls how often it happens? This guide right there on page 16, it has a calendar of events for the maintenance of your irrigation system. And it also suggests that we would adjust our irrigation controller at least 4 times a year. I would rather see you adjust it once a month on the same day that your water bill gets read, so that you know how you were watering for the whole month for the next water bill. That would be real beneficial to me. But all this is in this brochure. It's available to you. It's online if you want to look at it online, if you don't like collecting little brochures and things that hang around your house. But that's what we've got for you today in how to water and how to program your controller. The thing that you need to know about programming your controller is that you need 5 components to each program. You need to have the time of day correct on your time clock, or your irrigation controller, whatever you call it. You have to have the right day of the week set. You have to have a run time for whatever you're trying to water, and you have to have a schedule, a start time and a schedule. Now, the schedule can be the days of the week, or in most cases, we would rather see you using the skip days or the interval watering. And you might have a separate program for your turf and a separate program for your drip irrigation. And if you have another thing that needs to be watered, like a garden or pots, ideally you would have a separate system and a separate program for how to water those.